When Mom told me, I was 5 years old. It says it's time to go to school. I'm in school. And Mom told me that I was going to see a lot of people. And I did. She was right. Had so many friends. It was a chatterbox. In kindergarten, everybody was talking about a brother, a sister, a mommy, and a daddy. And I was doing the same. And then the second day, I walk into school. Same thing happened. But this was going to be different. My very first seizure in school. And that seizure was pronounced in a stare. Enough to frighten any one of you in this room wondering what's going on, let alone a 5-year-old. So as it happened, I'm looking and I'm talking. I just stopped because I was unaware. And when I came back to being aware of what's going on, I looked at everyone around me. And they looked at me as though I was strange. And I looked down, looked at my pants, everything was fine. Then I thought, maybe a little bit of snot underneath my nose, as a 5-year-old could have been. But I just proceeded, but I felt rejected. I really did. But that wasn't the first time. The very first time was when I was 2 years old, believe it or not. I had been in and out of hospitals considerably. Got in. Another time, which was going to change the whole thing. I was in the hospital all day long. Supper time came, and they delivered a tray of food and put it on my lap. And I looked at the tray, they opened it up, I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, they forgot something. They forgot to give Mom and Dad a tray. So I ate the food, looked at Mom, who was starving, and everything went well. Then 7 o'clock, Mr. and Mrs. Vincent, visiting hours are over, and Mom and Dad looked at themselves. Mom looked at me and says, "Dan, you're staying here tonight." And I looked at her, says, "No," in my 2-year-old voice, "I go home." I grabbed on my mom. I latched onto her. Started crying. I want to go home. The nurse came right behind her, peeled my arms off my mother. And I cried and cried as I watched Mom and Dad slowly walking away. I fell asleep sobbing. The next morning, I wake up. No Mom, no Dad. Just me. And the nurse, she was even gone. I was totally alone. And I felt rejected. Why? Because when Mom came back, she looked at me, says, "Hi Dan, how's it going?" We spent the whole day together. That evening, once again. And I looked at Mom, and I looked down. She had a huge belly. And she had been conditioning me over the 9 months' time that I was going to have a baby brother and sister. And I looked at it, and that moment shaped the next 17 years of my life. I knew what was going on. I was being traded in. But that was my thought as a 2-year-old. But back into school, when these kids were rejecting me, I looked at them and I said to myself, I'm wrapping myself in a bubble. And I did. And I was engulfed in that bubble, and nobody was going to hurt me. As time progressed, those kids got more cruel. And as I look at them, and they couldn't penetrate. But what happened, with that bubble getting thicker, I got home, and that bubble was still there. Mom and Dad, they couldn't get in. My brother, my sister, they had no room with me. I grew up on my own. So those seizures got worse. I was doing a lot of shaking on the ground. And as it progressed, they tried to give me different medication. And medication didn't work. My 18th year, graduation year, neurologist come up to me, says, Dan, what would you think of going for surgery? And I looked at it. Says, surgery? Really? Cool. Yeah, a way to change my life? I'm in. I said, what are my chances? And here's a doctor I had been visiting since I was about 6 years old. And he told me 98%. I was ecstatic. Let's do this. What do I sign on the dotted line? And he tells me, he says, before we keep on going, I need to let you know that you'll be one of 18 in the world who ever undergo this surgery. He says, whoa, wait a minute. First, you take my hopes, bring them up so high, and within 30 seconds, you crush them. 98% and 17, because the 18 patient wasn't done yet. How could that even combine? I didn't get it. So I thought back, because I was 18 years old, and I was at age of consent. My parents couldn't decide for me. That was my very first decision. The very first one. And I would have rather make a decision to buy a house, not this. But this was what was in my card. So I thought back, and I asked, Doc, what if I don't? What if I don't go through with this? And he looked at me. And here's a man I had known for a long time, and he looked at me square in the eyes. And he was tall, had broad shoulders. His hands were large, huge fingers, square jaw, intimidating. But he looked scared. Now I knew what he was going to say was not going to be good. So I braced myself. And he started. He says, your seizures, they're taking a toll on your brain. Every time you get a seizure, it's shutting down part of it. And as you keep on going, if you don't go for the surgery, you're turning into a vegetable. I felt it right in my stomach. That anxiety, I felt like vomiting that day. I felt so awful. So I took a moment, I looked at him, I said, let's do it. So I went for it. I gambled. I put my life in his hands. And he got rid of my seizures, well, the ones you could see. But unlike the slice of a knife that got rid of those seizures, he couldn't install the self-esteem that I really needed. Or get rid of that anxiety. Move forward 5 years, I get involved with a multi-level marketing who believed in me. The guys thought I could do something. I could become so successful. And I went through it. They led me to a self-help system. Tapes, books, and seminars. I did the whole thing, gained my confidence, start talking to people one-on-one, then in groups. But it wasn't until I started sharing my story with other people like you, making a difference in your world, that it truly made a difference to mine. Back up 5 years ago, I was in a neurosurgeon's office. And the neurosurgeon looked at me because she was looking at a scan of my neck, and she said, what happened when you were younger? Did you have a stroke, a brain injury of some type? And I explained my story, and she understood. And she shares this whole thing with me, the scan. And I'm looking at it. She says, what's the little white spot on top of my head? And she said, that's the void in your brain. She says, really? Wow. So it can't be. She said, look, have you ever had a printer run out of ink and leave a big blotch? That's what I thought I was looking at. So I pointed it out to her. And she says, yeah, that's the void. And that's when my jaw just dropped. They had removed my whole right temporal lobe over 30 years ago on that table. Now I share this story with you because in the bottom of my heart, I really understand and feel that if the kid from Northern Ontario, Timmins to be exact, the kid who used to cringe in his seat anytime the teacher would say anything about an oral report, the kid who had anxiety, who grew up with epilepsy, with all these seizures, with all the self-esteem issues, went through brain surgery. Well, that kid, if he was able to turn his life around, I believe from the bottom of my heart that anyone in this room, if I was able to make a difference in your life, anyone in this room with at least half a brain can make a difference.